A warm welcome to this hour of news. Well, we begin with breaking news. Saudi Arabia's public prosecutor says 5 people have been sentenced to death and 3 sentenced to 24 years in prison for the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The closed-door trial was held at the Criminal Court in the capital, Riyadh. The identities of the convicted haven't been released. Khashoggi was murdered in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul last year. Well, the Crown Prince Mohammad Bin Salman said he had no prior knowledge of the operation. Well, Mohammed Adow is live for us. Hi there, Mohammed. So let's talk first of all about the verdict. What do we know?
What we know is, Julie, that 5 have been sentenced to death. 3 would get prison sentences. So that is 8, and leaves 3 who had been investigated by the prosecutor and who have since been cleared. And they seem to be the main people in that group that is been suspected of killing Jamal Khashoggi on the 2nd of October 2018 when he walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul but never walked out. They are the former high-profile advisor to the royal family, al-qahtani, a man considered to be the right-hand man of Crown Prince Mohammed Bin Salman, as well as the former Deputy Intelligence Chief Ahmed al-Asiri, and then also released after being investigated by the prosecutor is the consul at the Istanbul Saudi consulate. So those have been released. So the 11, 5 have gotten death sentences, 3 prison sentences, and then the others released. That's what we know so far.
Mohammed, were we expecting this verdict right now?
Well, they've been they had said that they had put them on trial and it was ongoing, but it's almost unexpected that it would come at this time. But there's been a lot of pressure coming from the international community, particularly the United Nations, which has not only been talking about the need for justice in the Jamal Khashoggi killing, but also putting pressure on the United States and the European Union to act to see that there be justice. There's been also a lot of pressure coming from Turkey with its angry president at one point starting, leaking information of what they knew about the murder. And this is a murder that has generated so much global uproar. But what we know is there's been a lot of cover-up. There's been a lot of the lies coming from Riyadh has been so thin that even Donald Trump, who is a sworn admirer of the Crown Prince, has called it the cover-up, the worst cover-up ever. So there's been a lot of misinformation here and there, and very few expect that this verdict, as it is with the 3 most important men in those 11 who had been put on trial, released, will appease the anger that the killing of that journalist Jamal Khashoggi has caused.
Mohammed, do you think, to your point just there, that with this verdict, it will perhaps present more questions than it answers?
Well, that is how it looks at the moment. And I think the main thing that is going to raise a lot of eyebrows is the release of the men who've been considered to be leading the act of murdering Jamal Khashoggi. We're talking about the former high-profile advisor to the royal family, al-qahtani, as well as al-Asiri, the deputy intelligence chief, and also the consul in Istanbul at the time, because they were seen as the top people within the 15 people who are believed to have been there when Jamal Khashoggi was killed. And now that they've been let off the hook, it might create more anger in some quarters.
Mohammed Adow joining me there live from Ankara. Well, for more, let's talk now to Mehmet Celik. He joins us now from Istanbul. He's the managing editor of the Daily Sabah. That's an English language newspaper. Mehmet, very warm welcome to the programme. First of all, your view on this verdict. It seems that what's interesting about it is more those people who haven't been charged than those who have.
You're definitely right. I think the fact that some high-profile names have not been charged, it raises questions on credibility of the trial itself and whether or not these people were just picked as scapegoats so that there is a seemingly moving forward trial taking place. And I think this, the results announced today shows that it wasn't anything. It hasn't been anything more than just finding some finding some names to blame a big issue or a big problem or a complex murder on some names. But the fact that the consul, the fact that the al-qahtani is released, I think raised a lot of questions on the credibility of this whole process and whether or not the international community will be convinced with the result. I think it's a matter that we should look into because the top one of the top men on this whole process is released, and I think there should be some sort of questioning on why this person was part of this and why this person has not been charged with anything and released. Basically, there has been evidence showing phone calls between some of the people who carried out this incident, the murder, and Qahtani himself. So there is evidence linking all these figures that are released with the actual event taking place. The Consul General himself, for example, the fact that he's not found guilty is, I think, a problematic thing here that would raise a lot of questions about the credibility of the trial.
Mehmet, I wonder what you think the reaction might be where you sit right now in Turkey. We know, of course, that Recep Tayyip Erdogan kept the pressure on Saudi Arabia to get answers. What do you think the reaction will be where you are, since we're talking here about, again, this raising more questions than answering those we already had?
The reaction from Ankara, I think, from the beginning has been to seek a credible trial and to make sure that those who are responsible from top to the bottom are brought to justice. And I think the decision made today shows that the Ankara's concern from the beginning on the credibility of the process were very on place. So today's decision will make Ankara again raise these credibility issue, and I think the reaction will be similar to what it has been throughout the process from the beginning, and that is the fact that some blame is trying to be taken from those on really top in the royal family and responsible from this brutal murder. Ankara will still reiterate that those who are responsible from on the top, the decision makers, need to be brought to the justice, not those who, as well as those who actually committed the crime.
We heard Mehmet, Donald Trump say that, and he's an admirer of Mohammed Bin Salman, say that it was the worst cover-up ever. So I'm wondering, in wider reaction from the international community, what that might be in the days and hours ahead.
Well, international community has, Turkey has been basically the only vocal voice in the international community trying to make sure that some steps are taken against Riyadh. But beyond some condemnations, I disregard, I don't think any of the political leaders will come up with some concrete measures against Riyadh. However, I think in the international community's mind, being the civil society in the international community or the people or the journalists in the international community will make sure that this process and this announcement today find the right place in the agenda of the international community. But whether or not some concrete measures will be taken by the world leaders, I think that's something that is still questionable, because no concrete measures have been taken against Riyadh, and the story is diminishing the credibility of these leaders when it comes to human rights and democracy, human rights, and seeking justice for victims such as Khashoggi.
Mehmet Celik there joining me live from Ankara. Sir, thank you. Well, it's been over a year since journalist and US resident Jamal Khashoggi was killed. It happened on October the 2nd, 2018, inside the Saudi consulate, where he was planning on picking up documents for his upcoming wedding. Turkish officials said a hit team of 15 Saudis was sent to Istanbul to carry out the murder. At least 3 key players were removed from their high-level posts in connection to the case. They included Saud al-qahtani, once a top aide to Crown Prince Mohammad Bin Salman. He's believed to have overseen the murder whilst giving orders over Skype. Now, the prosecutor says he was investigated but not charged and was released. Saudi prosecutors had blamed Deputy Intelligence Chief Ahmed al-Asiri for coordinating the killing, but the prosecutor says he was released for insufficient evidence. Well, the residence of the Saudi Consul General at the time, Mohammed Adow, is where Turkish investigators say Khashoggi's body parts were disposed of. He too has been released by the prosecutor. Well, let's bring in Al Jazeera's senior political analyst, Marwan Bishara, on the line from Doha. Marwan, an extraordinary verdict to a story that really has put the spotlight on Saudi Arabia.
Yes, absolutely. This is, if you will, perhaps the 4th stage of this terrible tragedy against our colleague, journalist Jamal Khashoggi. It started with the Saudi denial that anything had happened at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, saying that they don't know where he is and so on and so forth. And then when the Turkish authorities released what they knew about the incident, then the Saudis came forward with some partial admission, saying rogue elements in the Saudi intelligence have carried this affair. And then they were hoping for a total dismissal of the entire affair, trying to move on with all sorts of festivities in Saudi and better relations with the Trump administration and so on and so forth. But that did not work out very well because of the especially media and congressional pressure on Saudi Arabia. And hence we're moving to the 4th stage, and that is some sort of a return to a crisis management, whereby the Saudis are trying or keeping up appearances as if they are dealing with the situation. But there are a number of problems with that, with the verdict today. One, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi is a political assassination, is extrajudicial assassination or killing. And hence, there has to be some political responsibilities. And we all know, from the CIA in the United States to the special rapporteur by the United Nations, Agnes Kalamar, that the Crown Prince has a responsibility in this issue. And we're sure, since there's no judiciary independence in Saudi Arabia, that the Crown Prince and his lackeys will not be prosecuted. And hence, once again, the special advisor, Saud al-qahtani, and the head of the intelligence, Asiri, have been released. And a number of others now are presumably going to be sentenced to death. Now, since those rogue elements that are sentenced to death, according to the prosecutor general, did not have, in his words, any enmity towards Jamal Khashoggi, then that poses the question, why would they kill him? Well, the only reasonable explanation is because they were ordered to. Ordered by whom? Well, it has to be someone in the political echelon. Clearly, this judiciary process does not have that kind of authority to investigate or to question the likes of the Crown Prince and his lackeys.
Marwan, timing-wise, why come up with this verdict now if the international community is simply going to turn around and say, this is just not credible?
Well, They are, what their argument is that, and that's been since the beginning when they first partially admitted the responsibility for the killing, is that they're trying to deal with it internally. That this is not something that the United Nations, the United States, let alone Turkey, will dictate, and that this is an internal affair of Saudi Arabia, and hence the judiciary is taking care of it. And if you remember, right after that partial admission, we entered into that phase of secret trial in Saudi Arabia. We never understood who, how, and why, and even whatever foreign ambassadors that were there did not really have much access into what was going on. And now, as I mentioned, because of the continued pressure coming out of the United States and other Western allies of Saudi Arabia, and because of the pressure coming out of Turkey, this issue could not just be washed away, could not be simply, sort of swooshed under the carpet. They had to come up with some kind of answers. And here we are in this phase that they're saying they're rogue elements, and we are prosecuting the rogue elements. But as I said, this is a political extrajudicial killing, and there is a political responsibilities. But you cannot expect in Saudi Arabia, where there is no independent judiciary, for this thing to take place. That's why this issue needs internationalization. This issue needs the United Nations and others to get involved. It at least needs some kind of an independent prosecutor of sorts that will be able to look at the political implications of the Saudi leadership in it. But for the time being, the Saudis are trying to provide some answers, partial, some of them even wrong-headed answers, in order to move on. Your question to your guest, and I think this is the most important question, will this do? My guess is it will not do. My guess is that the Saudis are trying, within the constraints of an authoritarian regime, to provide some answers, and I think these answers will prove falling short of what the international community expects on this issue.
Marwan Bishara joining me there. Marwan, thank you.